It's still number one. It's top of the pops. Are you seriously going to eat that? Welcome to Monstrosities, Mon Amour, the podcast that plays kiss chase around unloved places. I was thinking of getting two failed politicians to host a show this week, because won't anyone give them a break? Today, I was involved in a low-speed chase with a Milton Keynes delivery robot, which was made more complicated by the fact it was carrying my new trainers. Well, I was just about to leap onto it from behind a hedge when I was struck over the head by a copy of a hardback book of 100 20th century sports and leisure buildings, and bundled into the boot of an Austin Maxi. I spotted it was Catherine Croft, director of the 20th Century Society, the charity that campaigns to protect modern buildings, and I reckon she drove us 54.3 miles? All right, Catherine, you've had your fun. Now I expected us to be by some massive brutalist structure. But what's this?
We're in the middle of a park.
We certainly are. Which park?
Yeah, it's St James's Park, so right in the centre of London, just around the corner from the Houses of Parliament.
I can't imagine that many people would refer to St James's Park as a monstrosity. So what have you chosen? Why are we here?
Well, we are standing on a bridge, and I think it's a very lovely bridge, perhaps quite an understated bridge, but it's one with with a death sentence on it. So I'm taking that as, equating to being considered a monstrosity. Maybe that's a bit of a leap, but I thought it would be nice to do a change and look at something a little different from all those massive, big, brutalist buildings that I'm usually getting excited about. There aren't really many buildings here at all, are there? I mean, what I've done is I've brought us to stand on the Blue Bridge, which crosses the canal in St James's Park. And it's the sort of structure you kind of drift across, maybe hardly noticing. But it's actually scheduled at the moment for demolition. It's just got a certificate of immunity from listing. So I'm reckoning that means it's pretty much unloved. And I wanted to celebrate it.
So this is a little bridge that sits in the middle of the waterway in the middle of St James's Park. It's very quite a sort of flat, low-lying structure, isn't it? It has very, very horizontal. It hasn't really got a lot of presence.
No, it's pretty low to the water. It's got 3 spans. I think it's super elegant. It's just a place to encourage you to meander, to pause, and it was constructed as a place to look at the view. So if you look one way, you get to see Buckingham Palace, and you look the other way, you get to see the Foreign Office, Horseguards, all set behind trees. And it kind of looks amazing. It almost, looking that way, you can kind of imagine you're in Russia or something. It takes you out of the kind of experience of being in London as a great big hectic city and lets your mind wander all over the place. And that's what I love about it.
The bridge itself is quite Festival of Britain style, isn't it? It's that kind of era. It feels like sort of part of that early post-war reconstruction before a sort of slightly grander vision comes in. I mean, is that fair to say? It's sort of part of that style?
Yeah, I guess so. And the kind of green paint job adds to that. It was built in 1957, so a bit later than the Festival of Britain. And it was designed by the architect to the Ministry of Works, who's an interesting guy, Eric Bedford. He went on to design Post Office Tower.
Now, the Post Office Tower obviously is like one of the biggest landmarks in the city. For a long time it was the tallest building in London, and it's sort of amazing that he was almost simultaneously designing this very modest bridge, which is all about the view, and the Post Office Tower, which I guess was all about the technology and having, I guess, also the view to the next tower so that the signal could kind of reach across. But totally different effect on the city. Sort of amazing that he was so varied what he could do.
Yeah. I guess problem solving, functional buildings, structures. There are kind of clever things about the bridge. I mean, the deck, the bit that you stand on, looks really slim because it tapers. So in the middle, where it's doing most structural work, it's much, much thicker. And then as it goes out towards the edges, it thins out so that what you see looks very elegant. And I think maybe that mixture of structural innovation, and it was structurally innovative. It used a kind of patented system of pre-stressed post-tension concrete. So it was absolutely kind of pushing technical boundaries. It has quite a lot in common with the post office tower, which was all about making a structure that was really robust and didn't move, so that you weren't wavering around in the wind when you were trying to receive your signals.
The bridge itself, you wouldn't realise it did have any innovative stuff in it because it's so elegantly done, and it's so sort of subtle within the park, isn't it? It sort of almost disappears, doesn't it, from certain points.
Yeah, I think that is what I like about it. It's just so understated, but yet it makes your way of experiencing the park totally different. It just gives you that quiet place to stand and lean on the railing, kind of chat with the ducks.
And I go there quite a lot with my partner and my nieces to point at geeses. One of my favourite things is pointing at some colourful waterfowls. I mean, we were sat down on a bench right by the bridge, and 44 goslings walked across
Wow.
from the water onto the grass behind us, with a load of tourists just standing around taking pictures and gasping. That's a really lovely experience right in the middle of London. And I feel like the bridge really celebrates that, doesn't it? It allows you to enjoy the view, and it allows you to enjoy the place without kind of interrupting it too much.
Yeah, I think it does. Although I was just thinking, as you said that, you hardly ever see the pelicans, which are the top star on the waterfowl front in the park. They seem to kind of keep well clear of it.
The pelicans are sort of terrifying.
Oh, you wimp. I don't think
That's
anyone's
me.
ever been savaged by a pelican, John.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because the
Anyway.
bridge, as you say, it's sort of slightly away from them. They're sort of at one end. And the bridge is sort of right in the middle, super functional. Do you think that kind of functional thing is the reason why people haven't kind of fallen in love with it or en masse, Or do you think people have and they just don't, because it's such a modest structure, they don't really talk about it?
I think people do fall in love with bridges. I think the bridges are often really popular. When Waterloo Bridge was listed, there was lots of really interesting social history stuff about how that had been built by women when men were away during the war. I think bridges quite often embodied a lot of really interesting stories, and people get really excited about them. Yeah, when you look at what other post-war footbridges are listed, the main examples are much more kind of flamboyant and out there than this. So there's the Garrett Hostel Lane Bridge in Cambridge, which is a real kind of up and over hump. It makes a kind of big deal of getting over the water. And then the other one is the bridge in Durham that links the Cathedral Island with Dunelm House, which is the Architects Co-Partnership building built right into the riverbank. And that one is a concrete bridge, and it was made in two halves, and then the two halves were swung out to meet across the water. And there's a kind of very elaborate little bronze fixing link piece in the middle of it, so that the process of making it and installing it is really explicit and celebrated.
The lovely thing about bridges is just they are an expression of ingenuity, aren't they? They are, that's a fundamental issue of kind of human behaviour has been how to cross water. And you get endless different ways of doing that. You've chosen kind of a couple there that are so different from this one, and yet all doing the same kind of purpose. And this is almost like one of the most simple expressions of that, isn't it? It's a very, very sort of low key, but kind of rather lovely structure because of the sort of low keyness.
I love the fact that, when it was first finished, they were really worried about it wobbling. Remember back to the Millennium Bridge and all its problems with wobbling. So as soon as they had finished it, and they'd been aware that was a potential problem, so they had specifically done things to make sure it didn't wobble. But they then got 300 guardsmen in to march in formation over the bridge, whilst a team of engineers sat in a little rainboat and watched what happened.
It's not the first bridge here, is it? There were a couple of others before, is that right?
There'd been a canal here since the 17th century. And then there was a wooden bridge that went across in the early 19th century. As part of the Grand Jubilee celebrations. And then the park got remodelled by John Nash. And that's the point at which the kind of formal canal became the serpentine lake that it is now, with the kind of very informal, wavy boundaries. And then they put an iron suspension bridge across in 1857 that was, much more responsive to the new form of the lake. That was in a pretty bad way by the beginning of the 1950s. And they looked at repairing it, and then somebody gave them £20,000 for a new bridge, so they went for that.
And it's interesting because then it's designed by Eric Bedford, the chief architect of the Ministry of Works. And it's sort of interesting because he's not that well known as a figure, is he? And yet he's responsible for, one of London's most famous buildings, but then also some of the other structures like this one, which millions of people will have experienced over those years, since the 50s. Millions of people will have walked across that bridge and never known anything about it. And so there's a lovely kind of modesty to his story and to that stuff, isn't there? That it's not shouting.
Particularly in that post-war period, it was a time when huge amounts of architecture are built by people working in local and national government, and it was about building a better Britain. It wasn't about pushing your ego.
A lot of the work that you do in the 20th Century Society is celebrating a lot of those sort of slightly lost figures, isn't it, that aren't necessarily the really big names. Because when people think of like modern architecture, the immediate thought is to go the Bauhaus, Le Corbusier. But the lovely thing about the 20th Century Society is that it celebrates a lot of slightly unsung places and buildings and architects. And I think that's a really lovely aspect of your work.
Yeah, thank you, John. Yeah, and it definitely is. We've done a lot of work actually kind of recovering and building an alternative and broader canon and publishing books on lesser known architects and articles. Sometimes the information just isn't out there. The actual person who designed a building or the actual team that put together a building is just lost. I live on a 1950s Southwark designed council estate, which is beautifully designed, has lovely cat slide tiled roofs, really lovely details, lots of little individual courtyards that provide different sort of levels of play areas for kids of different ages. I love it. And the guy who runs our local gardening club wants to put a plaque up about the history of the estate. And there's all these myths going around. There's this myth that it was designed by a Swedish woman architect who, came here and forged a career here. And there's another one that it was designed for people who's had children who had some form of disability, and that it was all built around notions of healthy living with fruit trees in the garden. And all of those are really, really lovely stories. But just going back and going through the archives, none of that is recorded at all. And people are really, really disappointed that you can't, put a name or a character or a narrative to it. And I was like, well, yeah, but it doesn't make the buildings any less successful. It doesn't mean those people weren't there. But, but we can't just kind of make it up and stick it on the plaque. We've got to be kind of rigorous about our history. So I'm going through that with my neighbours at the moment.
But I remember one guy in particular that I interviewed about Elephant and Castle, and we were walking around some of the estates there, and he was saying he was a lecturer, and a geography lecturer, and he was take his students out around the area. He used to have a bet with the students that at some point somebody would come out of one of the tower blocks and say, "Oh, you see the guy that designed that killed himself." Because it's like this sort of narrative, and it becomes this urban myth, and it just spirals out of control. And suddenly every tower block has got the same urban myth that the same thing happened, which is not true anywhere. So, I mean, we're talking about St James's Park, which is a place of ridiculous kind of amount of history and legends. It's surrounded by all that grandeur, and the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, which is by far the kind of grandest building around there. I mean, forget Buckingham Palace, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is kind of outrageous. And there's something about the bridge that is allowing you to really enjoy all of that stuff, isn't it? It's sort of, and there's something about that sort of post-war architectural scene that's sort of about trying to problem solve, trying to make things better for everybody, trying to encourage kind of access to places.
Yeah, and what you're doing is you're not seeing the Foreign Office by George Gilbert Scott head on the street view. You're seeing it over the trees and with the curving edge of the lake kind of making a composition in front of you. It looks like an opening scene of a film or a book cover, or it looks like it's a story that you're going to walk into.
So what was your first experience? Can you remember what the first time you'd have gone to St James's Park?
We used to go, when I was a kid, my dad used to drive us up to town and we used to park in that little street that's between Horseguards and the Foreign Office, which has now kind of got massive security gates. You can't get a car anywhere near it. We would drive up, park there for free, walk down the steps by Clive of India and through the park. We used to buy my dad's suits in Simpson's sale every year on Boxing Day. We used to go, so it was all sort of frosty and misty. I guess that's my earliest memories. So when I was in the sixth form, I was at school really near there as well. So it was somewhere I would go after school. Kind of a lot of illicit hanging out, drinking in St James's Park, and supposedly do my A-level revision in the park. So kind of being there kind of late at night, being there out of hours, had a kind of mischievous quality about it, I guess.
Do you take any notice of the bridge, or did your interest in architecture sort of come later on and then you started to notice it?
I don't think I actually noticed the bridge for a very long time. As an object, I think as you notice it as an interval in that experience, that suddenly you get those wide open views and you're encouraged to pause. It's a pause on a sort of dynamic experience of a place. It's almost about not noticing what you're on. It's just about the way it very subtly controls how you move through the space.
And now it's going to be replaced, and there's a competition with 5 or 6, is it? Different architects who are all bidding to be the people that produce the Queen Elizabeth National Memorial, which the bridge is going to be part of. And then I guess we've got a lot of the usual suspects. I mean, as soon as I heard about this, I knew Thomas Heatherwick was going to be up there, and he is. So there we are. And I imagined it was going to be sort of maybe like a weeping rose or something from Thomas Heatherwick. It almost is that. It's sort of like some lily pads. Some designs are sort of quite simple. Some of them are incredibly elaborate and sort of sculptural. But it just sort of begs the question of this, this bridge still works brilliantly. It doesn't need to be a sort of fancy centrepiece. It can actually just be quite a modest part of the landscape, but it sort of almost feels like we can't let things be that. They've all got to be more of a statement.
Yeah, I think it is a real pity that it's going to take away something. I mean, the Diana, Princess of Wales fountain thing, which people weren't very enthusiastic about to start with, I've always loved. I think it's beautiful, and the way that it changes how the water flows with all that cross-cutting on the base of it, so that you hear the water moving in different ways as well as seeing it move. Anyway, I love it. It's a massive oval thing, but that didn't kind of get rid of anything else in Hyde Park. It took up a fairly boring bit of the park. Yeah, this is giving over. And it's not just the bridge bit. It's basically they're allocating a whole stripe of St James's Park from the north side down across the bridge and out the south side to St James's. And I think once they do that, then the current bridge is just not going to be wide enough. There's going to be so many more people coming that they will need to have a bridge with bigger capacity. But the whole premise of that is that the whole experience is going to be much more full on. I sort of feel that the whole competition package is just trying to pack too many events into a very small space.
And a small space that's already surrounded by crazy events. I mean, it's got some of the most extraordinary buildings that have ever been built in the world just around the edge. So does it need another big statement in the middle of it? Well, I don't think so. But clearly, yes, modern world has said, yes, we do. We want more. We want more maximalist version of St James's Park. So I prefer the more subtle post-war version myself. So, while I was in the boot of the Maxi earlier, there was something scuffling around, and it was a very nice sort of cosy cushion. And then I realised when I got out, it wasn't a cushion at all. What was it?
Oh, was that the capybara?
Yes, it was the capybara, I realised. Takes up quite a lot of room in your boot. I don't know why you're travelling around with one in the boot anyway in the first place, but why the obsession with capybaras?
Because they're extraordinary. One kind of core reason is obviously that they are like a very, very large guinea pig, and I was brought up with guinea pigs, and I'm deeply nostalgic for guinea pigs.
When you say you were brought up with guinea pigs, I mean you weren't literally brought up with guinea pigs.
No, I wasn't in the back garden in the hutch, no, but we had a lot of guinea pigs, and they did seem to come in the winter and breed under the kitchen units. They kind of got in under the plinth, which was, in retrospect, probably not very, very hygienic, but anyway. I guess I first came across capybara when I went to America to do a master's, and I had a flat at the end of a road up near the park in Wilmington, Delaware. And it was not exactly a fancy zoo at all. In fact, most of the animals looked a bit mangy and weren't exactly star species, but they had a lovely, lovely collection of capybaras in a pond, and you could see them all right through the fence, right by where I lived. So that kind of got me excited. And then when I was doing some work at Dudley Zoo, it's a real mix. So it has a medieval castle on top of a hill. And then on this very steep hill coming down in the 1930s, Lubetzky, who, architect of lots of fantastic social housing in London, built zoo structures, built homes for all sorts of different types of animals, and they're all little modernist masterpieces. So I was going there a lot for 20th Century Society, trying to find solutions to repairing the concrete and making those work for a modern zoo, because like the penguin pool in London, which was designed to make penguins hop in a way that was entertaining to humans rather than give penguins the best simulacrum of life in the wild. I got to meet the capybaras there because I had expressed a particular interest in tapirs, which is another story. But the tapirs were sharing an enclosure with the capybara. So that kind of got me re-excited about capybara.
And I mean, that has to be a pretty star animal to take your interest away from a tapir, which are like some of the most extraordinarily beautiful and bizarre animals. So why did the capybara take your interest?
They look so extraordinary, don't they? They have big, wide faces and snouts, and little short front legs, big back legs, kind of enormous eyes.
They're like a walking coffee table, sort of. They're so sturdy and solid and squat and sort of broad. They're not really built like any other animal, are they? They're quite an odd shape and size.
They are a very odd shape and size, but they are kind of like guinea pigs on a much bigger scale. I think it's that kind of funny thing of suddenly feeling that you're like, it's a sort of Alice in Wonderland experience. Your relationship to something you knew has suddenly got out of sync. I quite like that. I love the name. I mean, it's a kind of rat-a-tat-tat kind of capybara. I like that. I think they seem incredibly placid, but they have a kind of knowing look about them. I mean, all that's anthropomorphizing. I don't know. I mean, the more you kind of read up about them, the more you kind of get into it. I love the name. So, the species name in Greek, the first bit means water, and the second bit of it means feel happy, enjoy. So, they're beasts that like hanging out in water. I like the way they chew. Apparently, there's something weird about their jaws, so that they have to chew by moving backwards and forwards rather than side to side. They were hunted for their meat, and there was this thing about having a papal dispensation so that you could eat their meat in Lent, which I think, isn't it, that you used to be able to eat fish in Lent. So there were a few of those dispensations for things that the Catholic Church kind of was sort of arguing were kind of like fish. I guess it was because they were hanging out in water all the time. But I mean, so clearly not a fish.
No, that really is a bit of a difference. Yeah, no. I mean, you would have to be on a lot of drugs to think that was a fish.
You would.
One of the things I always find really charming about them is when you see them in the wild, like sort of on wildlife films. There's an amazing one about the Pantanal in Brazil, where whenever you see them, there seems to be like a bird standing on their back, sort of that kind of coffee table thing of just being an animal that other animals just come and stand on. Seems to be quite a lovely thing that happens to them, that they seem to just interact with other animals in quite a placid way.
Apparently they can sleep in water with just their noses sticking out.
Ooh. Don't try that at home. And it's weird, isn't it? Because I guess for a long time they would have been seen as quite unappealing animals, as being a sort of massive rodent. But now they've become like an incredibly fashionable animal, haven't they? And it feels like, this is sort of quite an interesting one for Monstrosities one more, because normally we're talking about stuff where stuff hasn't really come back. And I sort of feel like with capybaras, actually you've talked about something where they've had quite a horrible reputation, and now they've been culturally reclaimed, aren't they, by people? People sort of love them now. They've become a symbol of cuteness in a way that a generation ago, the idea of a giant rodent would be cute. People would have, laughed at you.
They've become stars through TikTok and Instagram. they absolutely have had their reputation turned around by that. And there are now capybara petting cafes. And in Staten Island Zoo, apparently in Staten Island Zoo, you can pay $35 and then a capybara will eat a piece of edible paper with your message on it. And apparently that brings you good luck.
A reverse fortune cookie type scenario there, where
Yeah.
you write the message and then it disappears rather than the other way around. You know, thinking about your two choices, I think the way that we save the bridge is we need to make it a TikTok sensation. So I'm going to see you down on the bridge. We'll do a choreographed dance routine, and we will save the bridge by making it a TikTok sensation.
So I think what we really need is a whole herd of capybara to come and do a dance routine on the bridge.
Amazing. I'm there for that. That sounds brilliant. Now, thanks so much for your choices, Catherine. So where can people find out more about you and your work?
They can go to the 20th Century Society's website, which is www.c20society.org.uk. And there's loads of stuff there about our campaigns and our casework, and also all the trips that we arrange to go and look at buildings both in the UK and around the world.
I mean, I love the 20th Century Society. I think it's an amazing thing. So do join, do check them out, and find out about all of these extraordinary places that a few years ago, none of us would have been able to find anything about before the 20th Century Society came along and dug out all of this amazing information from dusty old archives. So thank you for doing that. Much appreciated by a geek of the 20th century architecture bent.
Great. And we're looking forward to seeing you, John, in Milton Keynes. You're doing a tour for 20th Century sometime next year, aren't you?
I will be. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, do come on that. That'll be a huge amount of fun, and we'll be pointing at buildings galore, let me tell you. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. Get back in your maxi, and I will look after the capybaras. And as this is now one of those fast-paced, news-focused podcasts, and I am two failed politicians bouncing it up, the breaking news since recording this episode is that Norman Foster's glass bridge has been chosen to replace the blue bridge. Something flashy pretending to be unflashy. Like a CEO on Dress Down Friday, if such a thing exists anymore. It is 1998, right?
Tell me the thing that you loved before Monstrosities born Amour.
Thank you so much for listening. Monstrosities Mon Amour was created, presented and edited, no really, by John Grindrod. The theme tune is by Lorna Reese and Rufus Rees-Kashan, and the logo by Richard de Passando. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to my Substack. Allez tout droit!